Welcome to The Word Revealed with David Palmer and Scott Burns, where we talk about everything Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Let's join the conversation.
Welcome back to The Word Revealed. I'm David Palmer with my good friend Scott Burns, who loves ministry in the city of Corinth. Isn't that true?
That's true.
We've been talking about the work of the Lord there, and we had to pause with a lot more to explore. So, great successful beginning, vision of encouragement. We're told he stays there a year and a half, but it's not all easy.
No, it's not. The next little section there in chapter 18, verses 12 through 17, speak of a little bit of a political / religious kerfuffle. I don't know if that's a good word to use or not.
Term,
but
yeah.
Gallio, proconsul of Achaia, the Jews made a united attack on Paul and brought him before the tribunal. So a couple of cultural references there. What's the tribunal? What's the proconsul?
So let's start with the proconsul. So this is fascinating. This guy, Gallio, I mean, it'd be easy to pass right past this reference, but believe it or not, it's Gallio and his short tenure as the proconsul of Achaia that is the linchpin for reconstructing Paul's entire life. So
keep going.
It's surprising.
All right.
But we'll have to take a quick detour to the Oracle of Delphi, which is not very far from Corinth, relatively speaking. And Delphi is the place where people would go to consult the Oracle of Delphi. And the Oracle of Delphi is the place where where we have, it's a temple of Apollo, and people would go to ask the oracle questions. And this features as far back as like the Trojan War. And so the woman, the slave girl she was said to have had a Pythian spirit. It's the temple of the Pythian Apollo, who appears as a snake and speaks. And I mean, it's dark paganism where the priestess sits like on this fissure in the ground, and some scholars think there were gases that came up, and she was in like a hallucinating state and would speak these cryptic sayings in response to being paid. But it was a big deal. The Greeks called it the umbilical cord of the world. So what's this have to do with our topic at hand? Why this is relevant is that by the time the Delphi was really important in the ancient world, but at the time of the New Testament, the buildings around Delphi were really in disrepair. This area had been conquered by the Romans, ancient Greek heritage sites, and Claudius, since he's a traditionalist, he wants these buildings to be renovated. And so he issues a decree, and he writes, and it's in stone, and it's there. And it's this stone inscription that was found, actually rediscovered in 1905, and it's fragmentary. It's in 9 pieces, and it's this 9-piece inscription that basically Claudius identifies Gallio as the proconsul of Achaia during my 26th acclamation, which is the 26th public time that Claudius is like heralded as the emperor. And that has a very specific date of AD 51 and 52.
Okay.
And the inscription is on display in the museum in Delphi. Gallio is the son of Seneca the elder, and he's the brother of Seneca the younger, who was Nero's teacher. Gallio's actually a prominent Roman guy. He's known from other sources, and he serves as the proconsul, which was a really highly prestigious appointment. He's like the governor of Achaia. But the point is, he is the governor, and we know this from external stone inscriptions that he is governor there for 1 year, 51 and 52.
All right. And so then we can date
so
everything
we know,
else.
and believe it or not, that's it. That is the only external fixed point for Paul's entire life. And scholars work forward and backwards from the Gallio inscription.
There's a lot more in verse 12 than I realized.
So, and when I take people to Delphi, it's a spectacular sight. It's beautiful. There's some incredible bronze sculptures of the charioteer and all these things on display. And we get to the end of the museum, and there are these 9 broken chunks of stone on display. And I love to walk in the room and I say, these rocks right here are the key to Paul's entire chronology. And people are kind of like, I'm going to need a little help on that. but that's why it's quite important. But it also shows us the historicity of the Scriptures.
Yeah.
I mean, you can check it. And where you can check it, it just comes out looking very accurate. And so they bring him before the tribunal, which is the Latin translation really of the tribune as the place of judgment. In Greek, this place is called the Vima, or the judgment seat. And this is a prominent, elevated platform that is right adjacent to the marketplace. And it's where the courts or the governor makes his decisions. And it's similar in the gospel accounts when Pilate stands at the judgment seat and renders these public decisions. So it's sort of like the Supreme Court of the city. And of course, Paul will appear before Gallio's bema, Gallio's judgment seat, but Paul, being who he is, will not hesitate later in his letters to the Corinthians to say, we will all stand before the bema of Christ. And he relativizes the power of Gallio's bema. That's pretty cool.
It is.
And it's another spot where it's like it's worth going to ancient Corinth today because that whole bema platform is just still standing there. And you can walk up and you can just know, I'm standing right where this happened.
Wow. Well, the accusation that's brought before Gallio is this man is persuading people to worship God contrary to the law. Paul's about to open his mouth and make a defense. Gallio jumps in, says to the Jews, if this were a matter of wrongdoing or vicious crime, I'd have reason to accept your complaint. But since this is a matter of questions about words and names in your own law, see to it yourselves. I refuse to judge of these things.
This is just so accurate. I mean, you've got the Jewish community is it captures the debate. They're talking with each other about words and names in your own Torah. We would say chapter and verse, right? Even though the chapters and verses are added like over 1,000 years after the New Testament. But that's what they're talking about. They're talking about the meaning of the Bible. And Gallio's like, look, I mean, if this is about killing somebody or maybe a big bribe case, but he kind of, you can just sort of picture him being like, look, I'm really not qualified to like adjudicate on the meaning of Psalm 110.
I'm kind of busy on some rebuilding projects.
Yeah, and I got this pressure to build these rustic columns, and I'm only here for a year, and so he's looking on to his next appointment. So he refuses to judge them and adjudicate in this case. So he kind of drives them away. Look, somebody's got to be beaten. They grab Sosthenes, who is the new ruler of the synagogue, because Mr. Curly Hair became a Christian, and now this guy is the new synagogue leader. So Gallio says, well, look, you're kind of wasting my time. So they just give him a few blows of discouragement in front of the bema. So he gets kind of a little public hand slap, like, don't waste the governor's time. But, and this is why I love the names of the New Testament, we wonder, like, what happens to Sosthenes? And we see Sosthenes again in the New Testament. And he shows up as issuing greetings when Paul writes to the church in Corinth. So even though Acts doesn't tell us, Acts tells us the current synagogue ruler becomes a Christian, and the letters tell us that his replacement became a Christian too. So
that's pretty cool.
That is very cool. So yeah, so they stay for a year and a half, and God preserves their lives. The church of Corinth is an important church, and of course later and in a future season we'll probably explore these letters in detail, but this is the community that we see all these names. We see Jews and Romans, God-fearers. We see people coming to start this church in this city, which is it's the capital city of the region. It is also, it's a place, like we've said before, of commerce and wealth, of trade. It was famous for Corinthian bronze. It was a very, very expensive product produced there. And sometimes people say Corinth is like the Las Vegas of the ancient world. That's not like a perfect comparison, but it's flashy, and it's wealthy, and it's newly wealthy, and the most ornate or Baroque style of column capital is the Corinthian style, made to imitate the acanthus leaf. And so this style of capital was the rage in the first century. So it's that kind of a place. It's an active place, and yet it's this church that's a mix of Jews and Gentiles, that Paul loves these people, and really cares about them.
And they got a lot going on. I mean, we'll take a deeper dive maybe one day, but this is a church, when he writes to them, there's a lot of sin, there's a lot of struggle. He loves these people, calls them saints. Yeah. But when you're reading what they're dealing with, you're like, how are you calling these guys saints?
Right.
And that he's also very frustrated by them at times. Like he expresses a lot of conflict with them, but he loves them. I mean, it's a real beautiful picture of just the complexity of real ministry.
Yeah, that's right. And telling people of who they are called to be in Christ. But we see their beginning right here. And, they end up as, it's interesting that Luke tells us that the non-Christian part of the Jewish community, together with members of the pagan community, make a united attack. And yet when we open in 1 Corinthians, we see that the church is wrestling with internal divisions.
Yeah.
But they end up, writing to Paul, as when he's doing ministry later in Ephesus, they write to him a bunch of great questions. And 1 Corinthians gives us his answers to all of these discipleship questions that are fantastic. But we see in 2 Corinthians that they kind of fall back in love with their flashy, glitzy culture, and he has to remind them that real ministry is based on imitating Christ. So,
there's not a perfect church on planet Earth. We've all got things that we wish were a little different about our church. I have, on occasion, when people have voiced a concern or a complaint about my church, I've said, well, why don't you just go read Corinthians and then tell me how you see things after that? Because there's a lot going on in Corinthians.
Yeah,
but it's gospel work,
and it's work that's it's changing people over time.
Yeah.
And sometimes we wish that happened sooner than it does, or faster than it does. Sometimes I wish that the sanctification happened faster in my own life. And sometimes I feel like sins that I thought I got rid of or were in the rearview mirror, they still lurk around. Yeah, he loves them, and he humbles them, he challenges them. I mean, he gets in their face in writing, and at some point he's just like, all right, I've had enough. I got to come visit you guys face to face. And the happy ending, just to sort of peek ahead, is that we know that they received his loving rebuke well in the end. We know that because he sends 2 Corinthians ahead of resolving to visit them in person. And when he gets there in January of AD 57. He's written this pretty intense letter, and I think we can know that they received him well because he stays there for 3 months, and it's during those 3 months that he writes Romans and looks ahead to future ministry. And if that arrival had been a disaster,
probably take on your writing project somewhere else.
Yeah, and I just don't think Romans comes out of you if you've just had like a total church meltdown. Yeah, so they head out from there and they set sail for Syria, which is the Roman province there that includes Israel. Priscilla and Aquila join him. He stops at Kenkrea. In Greek, this is pronounced Kenkreas, and this is the neighboring port, Corinth, because of its proximity to these two ports. It was very wealthy, and the land is very narrow, that when you go from the landmass of Attica to the landmass of the Peloponnesos in southern Greece, they are connected just by a very tiny, thin sliver of land. Corinth is the port facing one direction. Kenkreas is the port facing the other direction. And many people in the ancient world tried to cut a slice through that land, but everyone who tried to do it ended up being killed or committed suicide. So the two most famous attempts were Julius Caesar and Nero. Both tried to make a slice through this, and they both died. So in the Roman minds, like, maybe we ought to just leave this how it is. And it's not until modern times that with heavy equipment that there is it's called the isthmus. It's kind of hard to say. But there's a slice through it, and ships can be pulled through there, and it saves like 300 nautical miles of transfer. And they abandoned the project and actually took ships out on land and rolled them across that, and then put them in the water on the other side, rolled them over logs. So think of the effort to do that.
Yeah, that doesn't sound easy.
No, but it shows you how much time is saved, actually,
yeah,
and expense. So, but Corinth was also known. They hosted. We're familiar with the Olympic Games. The Corinthians also hosted the Isthmian Games, which were another kind of, it's sort of like alternating between the Euro Cup and the World Cup. And so Paul does use athletic imagery for the first time in Corinth. So there are things in the letters that emerge by his real contact with the culture that he's in. But since hair featured prominently earlier in this chapter, straight hair, curly hair, Paul cuts his hair. And he cuts his hair, and this is the action of taking a Nazirite vow. And I think this is really moving as well, that a Nazirite vow in Numbers is a time of voluntary consecration to God. And you let your hair grow out, and then you cut it at the end of that, and you just dedicate that to God as an offering. And this isn't a perfect parallel, but you see people sometimes today, and they're like, they're going to dye their hair blue for the tournament or something, or they mark their body in some way. And for Paul, he's still a devout Israelite who believes in Jesus. And I think we get a clue that this season of ministry had a certain intensity to it, and he gave himself fully to God. And he took a Nazirite vow, and then he cut his hair in Kenkreas, and he's headed eventually back to Jerusalem. But he stops in Ephesus, leaves Priscilla and Aquila there. Ephesus is a big target, and they ask him to stay, but he says no, and prophetically says, I'll return to you if God wills. And of course, in his third journey, he's going to come back and stay in Ephesus for 3 years. But he sails across the Mediterranean, lands in Caesarea, the city of Herod. He went up and greeted the church, and that's interesting. Luke doesn't tell us, but you're familiar with the Bible, and you go up always just to one place, and that's Jerusalem. So he goes up to Jerusalem, greets the church in Jerusalem, completes his Nazirite vow, and then he goes back down to Antioch and tells the sending church all that's happened. And again, it's for our benefit that we call these journeys or missionary trips, like the first, second, third journey. That's our rubric to help us keep organized. But then this really starts the third missionary journey in Acts 18:23, that they departed, went from region of Galatia, Phrygia, strengthening and encouraging the disciples. So this is the start of the next big trip from Antioch.
Well, we'll have to dig into that.
Yeah, we will. So there's just so much happening, and just real pictures of ministry, lives being changed, and sticking it out, and persevering, and at the heart, I think, of what we've been seeing. This podcast is called The Word Revealed, and I think at the heart of what Paul is seeing and proclaiming, and those with him, they are saying that the real word revealed is to see Jesus Christ as the promise of God fulfilled in his incarnation, death, resurrection, and forgiveness. So that's the gospel, and that's the meaning of the Bible. So we'll press on and keep going with them and meet some more interesting people along the way. We're going to meet a fascinating guy named Apollos here in the next episode. But it's a delight to be with you, and thank you to all those sharing this journey with us. And we pray God's blessing on you, and look forward to seeing you on the next episode of The Word Revealed.
Looking forward to the third missionary journey.
Amen.
Thank you for joining Dr. David Palmer, Senior Pastor at Kenwood Baptist Church in Cincinnati, and Scott Burns, Associate Pastor. Meet us here next time for another conversation on the Bible.